Hello, and welcome to another episode of Good Clean Commander. I'm Ashley, and
And
you're Ken.
today my
You're
name
Ken.
is going to be Fred. Fred EDH. Hello. Nice to
Fred?
meet you.
Fred?
Fred EDH.
I thought you said friend EDH? I thought you forgot your
Oh,
name
even
for a
better. No.
second, to be
Yeah,
honest.
no, cut that. My name is Friend EDH,
Friend
and welcome to
EDH.
another episode of Good Clean Commander.
Oh,
I'm just gonna
lovely.
change it now every
Every
episode. You
time.
never know what I'm gonna
Just totally a different name every time. You
throw
know?
them off the lead. Anyways,
So that's what you want as a
so
content creator.
welcome back. We have a sort of a bonus episode. When we did our Doctor Who Planechase game, we actually did 2 recordings secretly. Y'all didn't know that, but we did. So we're back with the same group. We have Justin Parnell, Kurohitsuki, and ThatMillGuy, and myself. And yeah, it's just more Doctor Who shenanigans for your nerves.
Yeah. So, with no further ado, let's have a good, clean
Clean
game.
game. We need a song now, like that plays.
Yeah, we're just starting it off that way. Well, anyways, let's jump into it. Chef, aka ThatMillGuy, is playing Davros, Dalek Creator. This villainous deck wants their opponents to lose 3 or more life so Davros can trigger to make more Dalek creatures. And in Chef's starting hand, they have a Frostboil Snarl, a Mountain, River of Tears, Propaganda, Arcane Signet, the Toymaker's Trap, and Vislor Trulaw. Justin is playing the 13th Doctor with their companion as Yasmin Khan. This deck cares about getting counters on creatures by casting spells from exile, and in Justin's starting hand they have a Mountain, Rogue's Passage, Path of Ancestry, Rootbound Crag, Surge of Brilliance, Throes of Chaos, and a Decaying Time Loop. Kurohitsuki is playing the 10th Doctor and Rose Tyler. This deck wants to suspend spells and remove suspend counters to flood the board with value. And in Kuro's hand, they have a Command Tower, Path of Ancestry, Mystic Monastery, Martha Jones, All of History, All at Once, Syllabi Soothsayer, and The Moment. Ken is playing the 4th Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith. This Doctor wants to utilize historic spell synergies to gain value. And in Ken's starting hand, they have Talisman of Progress, Banish to Another Universe, Traverse, Eternity of Forest, Sungrass Prairie, Thriving Heath, and 500-Year Diary. Ken starts off the game with a pre-game action, where Ken flips the top card of the Planner deck, revealing Storm Cage Containment Facility. This gives each creature card in Graveyard's escape. Chef then starts his turn by drawing and playing an untapped Frostboil Snarl, revealing a mountain from his hand. He then passes the turn. Kuro draws and plays a tapped Mystic Monastery. Justin then draws for turn and plays a Path of Ancestry, naming Doctors. He then rolls a blank on the planar die and passes the turn to Ken. Ken draws and plays a tapped Celestial Colonnade, and he rolls a blank on the planar die as well, and then passes the turn. Chef then draws and plays a mountain as land for turn. He then pays 2 and casts an Arcane Signet, and then passes his turn to Kuro. Kuro untaps, draws, and plays a Command Tower. He then pays 2 to cast The Moment. This artifact gets a time counter during each of Kuros' upkeep, and it can phase out creatures for 2 mana as well as destroy all non-land permanents with mana value less than or equal to the number of time counters on it for 3 mana. Kuro then passes the turn. Justin untaps, draws, and plays a mountain as land for turn, and he then follows that up by paying 2 to foretell a card. Ooh, mysterious. Justin then rolls the planner die and hits a blank, so he passes the turn to Ken. Ken untaps, draws, and plays a forest. He then pays 2 and casts his commander, Sarah Jane Smith. Now whenever Ken casts a historic spell, he can create a clue token. Ken rolls another blank as well, and then passes the turn. Chaff untaps, draws, and plays a River of Tears as land for turn. He then pays 4 to cast Solemn Simulacrum, aka Sad Robot. Chaff searches for a basic island and puts it into the battlefield tapped. He then passes the turn. Kuro untaps, adds a time counter to his moment, and draws for turn. Kuro then pays 2 and casts his commander, Rose Tyler. He follows that up by playing a tapped Path of Ancestry, naming Doctor. Ooh, who would have thunk? Kira then passes the turn. Justin untaps, draws, and plays a Root-bound Crag as land for turn, and he then pays 3 to cast his commander, the 13th Doctor. And since he played a Doctor, Justin scries off his Path of Ancestry, choosing to keep the top card on his library. Justin then rolls the planner die and lands on Planeswalk. Ken reveals the next plane to be Besieged Viking Village. This plane gives all creatures the Boast ability, as well as puts indestructible counters on creatures when chaos is rolled. Happy with the new plane, Justin then passes the turn. Ken untaps, draws, and plays a tapped Temple of Plenty, scrying 1 to the top. Ken then pays 2 and casts a Talisman of Progress. Sarah Jane triggers, and Ken creates a clue token. Ken rolls a blank on the planner die and then passes the turn. Shaft untaps, draws, and plays a tapped Temple of Malice, scrying 1 to the bottom. Shaft pays 1 and casts a Soul Ring. He then follows that up by paying 3 to cast Propaganda, meaning anyone who wants to attack him will have to pay 2 mana per creature. Shaft then uses his 3 remaining mana to cast the Toymaker's Trap. This card reads as, at the beginning of your upkeep, secretly choose a number between 1 and 5 that hasn't been chosen. If you do, an opponent guesses which number you choose, then you reveal the number you choose, and if they guess wrong, they lose life equal to the number they guessed, and you draw a card. If they guessed right, sacrifice the Toymaker's Trap. Shaft moves to combat and swings his Solemn at Ken. Ken declares no blocks and takes 2, putting him down to 38 life. Shaft then passes the turn. Kira untaps, adds a time counter to his moment, and draws for turn. He plays a tapped Irrigated Farmland, and then pays 3 and casts Syllabi Soothsayer. When Soothsayer enters the battlefield, Kuro reveals cards from the top of his library until he reveals a non-land card with mana value 3 or greater. Kuro reveals a Judun Enforcers and then suspends it with 3 time counters on it. Kira then moves to combat and swings Rose Tyler at Justin. On attack, Rose Tyler triggers and Kira adds 2 time counters to Rose, making her a 4/4. Justin declares no blocks and takes 4 damage, putting him at 36 life. Kira then passes the turn, and Justin untaps, draws, and plays a Rogue's Passage. He then pays 2 and casts Talisman of Impulse. Justin follows that up by paying 2 and foretelling a second card. Moving to combat, Justin swings his commander at Ken, and Ken declares no blocks, taking 2 damage, putting him down to 36 life as well. During his post-combat main phase, Justin pays 1 to boast his commander, putting a +1/+1 counter on it. Justin then rolls the planner die, landing on Chaos. Chaos ensues, and Justin puts an indestructible counter on his commander. Moving in step, Justin untaps his commander thanks to the newly added +1/+1 counter, and then passes the turn. Ken untaps, draws, and plays a tapped Thriving Heath, choosing blue. Ken then pays 4 to cast his second commander, the 4th Doctor. Sarah Jane triggers, and Ken creates a clue token. Ken then rolls a blank on the planner die and passes the turn. Shaft untaps, and during his upkeep, the Toymaker Trap triggers, and Shaft secretly picks a number between 1 and 5. Shaft chooses Ken to pick a number, and Ken chooses 4. Shaft reveals he too selected 4, which means the Toymaker's Trap is destroyed. Stonks? Moving to combat, Shaft swings his Solemn at Kuro. Kuro declines to block and takes the 2 damage, putting him at 38 life. During his second main phase, Shaft then pays 2 to cast the Master Formed Anew. And when Shaft casts the Master, he may exile a creature he controls and put a takeover counter on it. He chooses to exile the Solemn, meaning the Master enters the battlefield as a copy of Solemn. His new Solemn triggers, and Shaft searches his library for a Swampy Poo and puts it into the battlefield tapped. Following that up, Shaft then pays 6 and casts a Wound Reflection. Now whenever an opponent loses life during a turn, they lose the same amount of life at the end step. Move into end step, Kuro loses an additional 2 life thanks to the Wound Reflections, putting him at 36. Shaft then passes the turn. Kuro untaps, adds a time counter to his moment, and removes the time counter from his suspended card. He then draws for turn, and then Kuro follows that up by paying 5 to cast his second commander, the 10th Doctor. Moving to combat, Kuro swings Rose Tyler at Ken and Soothsayer at Justin. On attack, Rose triggers, and Kuro adds 4 time counters onto Rose. Editor's note here, Kuro should have added only 2 time counters onto Rose, 1 for the moment and 1 for the card in suspension. However, this doesn't change the outcome of the game. Moving on, the 10th Doctor also triggers, meaning Kuro exiles the top card of his library until he exiles a non-land card, and he exiles a rotating fireplace and suspends it with 3 time counters. Moving to blocks, Justin blocks the Soothsayer with his indestructible commander, and Ken chooses not to block at all. Soothsayer dies, and Ken takes 7, putting him at 29. Editor's note here again, Ken thought Kuro ordered the attack triggers, so Rose Tyler would get an additional time counter on her, so he should have only had 6 damage taken. Kuro, after this stonksy turn, passes. Justin untaps and draws for turn. He moves directly to combat and swings his commander at Kuro, paying 1 to have it boast, making it a 4/4. Another editor's note here. It is at this time that Ken remembers the wound reflection is out, so he takes the damage he should have at the end of Kuros' end step. Now, going back to the game and moving to declaring blockers, Kuro blocks with his 3/5 Doctor, meaning the 2 creatures just bounce off each other. During his post-combat main phase, Justin pays 2 to cast a Memory Worm. He follows it up by tapping his 2 lands to cast a TARDIS. Moving in step, Justin untaps all of his creatures with counters and then passes the turn to Ken. Ken untaps, draws, and plays a Sungrass Prairie as land for turn, and then he pays 1 to cast Banish to Another Universe. When it enters the battlefield, Ken chooses to have it exile Shaft's Wound Reflection for as long as Banish to Another Universe is on the battlefield. Ken follows that up by paying 4 for 500-Year Diary. The diary enters the battlefield tapped and taps to add a blue mana for each clue that Ken controls. Sarah Jane triggers, and Ken creates another clue token. He then passes the turn. Shaft untaps and draws for turn. He rolls the planner die, and it lands on Planeswalk. Woo! Ken reveals the next plane to be Gardens of Tranquil Repose. This plane says whenever a creature dies, it is exiled instead, and the controller scries 1. Whenever chaos ensues, that player creates X3/3 Dialects with Menace for equal to +1 the number of creatures exiled with Gardens of Tranquil Repose. Shaft then pays 4 and casts Vizsla Trulaw. Upon entering the battlefield, Shaft may choose a player to take control of Vizsla. Shaft chooses to keep Vizsla in his control, and Vizsla also reads, at the beginning of your end step, draw a card, then you lose life equal to the number of cards in your hand. Shaft follows this up by paying 4 for his commander, Davros, Dalek Creator. Moving in step, Vizsla triggers and Shaft draws a card and loses 2 life, putting him at 38. He then passes the turn. Kuro untaps, adds a time counter to his moment, and removes a time counter from each of his suspended cards. Kuro then draws for turn and plays a Plains. During his pre-combat main phase, Kuro pays 6 and casts The Parting of the Ways. The first chapter of this saga lets Kuro exile the top 5 cards of his library and put any number of non-land cards exiled this way into suspend with time counters equal to their casting cost. Kuro reveals the top 5 cards and puts all 5 into suspend. Moving to combat, Kuro attacks Ken with Rose Tyler, and on attack, Rose triggers, and Kuro puts 10 more time counters on Rose. Editor's note, again, there should have been a little bit less here. Should have been 9 counters, since Rose doesn't count herself. Back to the game. Before combat damage is dealt, Ken pays 1 and casts Path to Exile, choosing to exile Rose Tyler. Rose is exiled, and Kuro searches up a basic island and puts it into play tapped as part of the spell cost. Kuro passes the turn. Justin untaps and draws for turn. He pays 2 to cast one of his Foretold cards, the Foretold Soldier. Since Justin casts a card from exile, his commander triggers, and Justin puts a +1 counter on his worm. His worm also triggers, getting another counter, and then it deals 2 damage to Shaft, putting him at 36 life. Shaft then discards and draws. Justin cruises TARDIS with the Foretold Soldier, and then pays 2 to cast his second Foretold card, Surge of Brilliance, allowing Justin to draw cards equal to the number of cards that were cast from anywhere other than his hand. The Doctor and the Worm trigger again, and Justin puts a +1/+1 counter on the crewed TARDIS and the Memory Worm, and chooses to have Shaft take 2 and discard a card and draw. Shaft goes down to 34 life. Surge resolves, and Justin draws 2 cards. Justin then plays the Gallifrey Council Chamber as land for turn, surveilling 1 card into the graveyard. Moving to combat, Justin swings the TARDIS at Kuro and the Doctor and Worm at Ken. Ken has the 4th Doctor block the Worm, then Ken takes the 4 commander damage, putting him at 18 life. Unable to block, Kuro takes 3, putting him at 32 life. The 4th Doctor and the Memory Worm die, meaning they are both put into exile because of the garden, and both Ken and Justin scry 1. Ken chooses to put his commander back into the command zone. Since the TARDIS attacked this turn, the next spell Justin casts gains Cascade, and Justin may Planeswalk. During his second main phase, Justin pays 2 and casts a Psychic Paper. Justin cascades into a Ponder and casts it for free. The Doctor triggers, and Justin puts a +1/+1 counter on the Foretold Soldier. Ponder resolves, Justin looks at the top 3 cards and then decides to shuffle and draw a card. Justin chooses to have the table Planeswalk, so Ken reveals 2 Streams Facility. This plane says, whenever you Planeswalk to 2 Streams Facility and at the beginning of the first upkeep of the game, each player chooses Green Anchor or Red Waterfall. Each player who chooses the Green Anchor may play an additional land, and creatures controlled by players who choose Red Waterfall get +2/+0 and have haste. Whenever chaos ensues, each player who last chose Green Anchor chooses Red Waterfall and vice versa. Justin, Shaft, and Kuro choose Red Waterfall, and Ken chooses Green Anchor. Justin rolls the planner die, and it lands on chaos, meaning each player has to swap their choices. Moving in step, Justin untaps all his creatures with counters and then passes his turn. Ken untaps, draws, and plays a Horizon Canopy as land for turn. Ken then taps his diary for 4 blue mana and casts Traverse Eternity. This allows him to draw cards equal to the highest mana value among historic permanents he controls, so he can draw 4 cards. Ken then rolls the planner die, landing on a blank. He then pays 4 to cast Perry Brown. Now, the first historic spell Ken casts each turn has Convoke. Sarah Jane triggers, and Ken creates a clue. Wanting to fill the board with as many blockers as possible, Ken uses his remaining 3 mana to cast the first Doctor. When the Doctor enters the battlefield, Ken searches his library for a TARDIS and puts it into his hand, and he also claims another crew token. Ken then passes the turn. Shaft untaps and draws for turn. He starts off by rolling the planner die, landing on Planeswalk. Ken reveals the next plane to be TARDIS Bay. This plane states that the first spell cast each turn with mana value 2 or greater has Cascade, and when Chaos is rolled, that player gains control of target artifact and Planeswalks. Moving to combat, Shaft swings his commander, the Solemn Clone, and Vizsla all at Kuro. Kuro blocks Vizsla with his commander and takes the rest, putting him from 32 to 27 life. During his second main phase, Shaft casts Feed the Swarm, targeting Ken's Banished to another universe, and because Shaft casts a spell with mana value 2 or greater, he cascades into a Wayfarer's Bubble. Feed the Swarm resolves, destroying Ken's enchantment, and returns Shaft's Wound Reflection to the battlefield. Wanting to get off this plane, Shaft pays 1 to roll the planner die again. He then rolls Planeswalk, and Ken reveals the next plane to be the Lux Foundation Library. This plane grants each player no maximum hand size, as well as lets each player draw whenever they deal combat damage. When chaos ensues, that player may put a shadow counter on a creature they control. Still, in his second main, Shaft pays 3 for a laser screwdriver. He immediately taps the screwdriver and his 3 remaining lands to cast the Master Mesmerist. Moving in step, Shaft draws a card and loses 1 life, going to 28. Rune Reflection also triggers, and Kuro takes an additional 5 damage, putting him at 22. Editor's note here, Shaft missed Davros' trigger, sadness on the stack. Shaft then passes the turn. Kuro untaps, adds a time counter to his moment, and removes a time counter from each of his suspended cards. Both Solarian and Judun Enforcers lose their last time counter and are cast for free. Enforcers prevents opponents from attacking Kuro with more than one creature. Kuro draws for turn and moves his saga to the second chapter, letting Kuro time travel twice. Kuro then adds a time counter to his moment and removes a time counter from each of his suspended cards twice. Both the Talisman of Creativity and Rotating Fireplace lose their last counters and are cast for free. Fireplace enters the battlefield tapped with a time counter on it. Kuro then pays 4 floating a mana to cast Kate Stewart. Stewart gives Kuro a 1/1 soldier every time he puts 1 or more time counters on a permanent. Kuro then rolls the planner die, landing on Chaos. Chaos ensues, and Kuro puts a shadow counter on his commander. Moving to combat, Kuro swings his commander at Justin. On attack, Kuro's commander triggers, and Kuro suspends Grasp of Fate with 3 time counters. Unable to block due to the shadow counter, Justin takes 3 commander damage, putting him at 33 life. During his second main phase, Kuro pays 4 for an All of History all at once. Since Kuro has cast 5 spells this turn, he time travels 6 times. Kuro then adds a time counter to his moment in Fireplace and removes a time counter from each of his suspended cards 6 times. Kate triggers and Kuro makes 12 1/1 soldier tokens. Sonic Screwdriver, Jenny Generated Anomaly, Sally Sparrow, Starwell, and Grasp of Fate are all cast for free. When the Grasp enters the battlefield, Kuro chooses to exile Justin's commander, Ken's Diary, and Shaft's Propaganda. Feeling pretty good about his explosive turn, Kuro then passes the turn. Justin untaps and draws for turn. He then pays 1 to cast a Carpet of Flowers. Editor's note, it is at this time Justin remembers the Wound Reflections is out, so he takes the damage he should have taken during Kuros' instep. Justin then pays 5 to recast his commander, the 13th Doctor. Moving to attacks, Justin crews his TARDIS and swings it at Ken, and he swings the Foretold Soldier at Shaft. Unable to block, Ken takes 3 flying damage, putting him at 14. Shaft blocks with his Mesmerist, killing it. Since the Foretold Soldier dealt damage, it becomes Foretold again. Moving to his second main phase, Justin adds 2 mana from Carpet and uses it to equip his commander with Psychic Paper. During Justin's end step, Ken loses 3 more life from the Wound Reflections, putting him at 11. Justin then passes the turn to Ken. Ken untaps, draws, and plays an Exotic Orchard as land for turn. Ken then pays 5 and casts a Hero's Podium, giving his legendary creatures +X/+X for each legendary creature he controls. Sarah triggers, and Ken makes a clue. Ken then rolls the planner die and lands on a blank. He follows that up by paying 2 for his own TARDIS, gaining 1 or more clues from Sarah Jane. Ken then passes to Shaft. Shaft untaps and draws for turn. He pays 2 to tap his Screwdriver and surveils 1, choosing to put the card into the graveyard. Moving to combat, Shaft swings his commander, Solemn Copy, and Vizsla at Justin. Justin, unable to block, takes 7 damage, putting him down to 23. Shaft remembers we're on the Lux Foundation plane and draws 3 cards. And then during his second main phase, Shaft plays an island and then rolls the planner die 4 times, paying 6 mana to do so. On his final roll, Shaft rolls Chaos, letting him put a shadow counter on Ken's first Doctor. Moving to end step, Shaft's Wound Reflection triggers, and Justin loses 7 more life, going down to 16. Then Davros triggers, and Shaft makes a 3/3 Dalek, and Justin faces a villainous choice, choosing to discard a card. Shaft's Vizsla triggers, and Shaft draws a card and loses 5 life, putting him down to 23. Editor's note, Shaft put his life total at 26 instead of 23. But oh well, doesn't change the outcome of the game. Lastly, Shaft pays 2 and cycles his Cannon Slough to draw a card and passes the turn. Kuro untaps, puts a time counter on his Fireplace and moment, and draws. His saga triggers its final chapter, and Kuro gets to destroy 1 of each of his opponent's artifacts. Kuro destroys both Justin's and Ken's TARDISes and Shaft's Dialect token. He then pays 5 floating mana from his Fireplace to cast the Day of the Doctor. Chapter 1 triggers, and Kuro exiles cards from the top of his library until he exiles a legendary card. He may play that card for as long as the Day of the Doctor remains on the battlefield. Kuro reveals the War Doctor and then casts it using 2 of his floating mana, as well as tapping his Talisman and Path of Ancestry. Kuro follows that up by using the last 2 floating mana along with an island to cast Martha Jones. Jones enters, giving Kiro a clue token. He then pays 1 and taps his sonic screwdriver to untap his fireplace. Moving to combat, Kiro sends his 12 soldiers and Kate at Shaft, his star whale at Ken, and everything else at Justin. After attackers are declared, Kiro activates Kate's ability by paying 8 mana to give all of his attacking creatures +X, where X is the number of time counters among permanents he controls. So, Kiro swings with his 19 + 19 creatures and wins! GG's all, that was fun. Well, I have to say, I still enjoyed eating my popcorn watching y'all play.
Yeah, and I will say, as the person who wrote that script, there were a lot of triggers. Hopefully y'all kept up, because lots of stuff was happening.
Yeah, I think that was the fun part of editing it too, you know? Production value here.
There's so many cards, and like, don't get me wrong, the flavor and theming is fantastic. Just constantly like listing out card names as like first name, last name, I find very funny.
Yeah.
When someone's just like, oh, and Kuro played Joe McNeil from accounting. Anyways, the other thing that was kind of funny is a lot of these cards were very unique and convoluted. So a lot of the abilities were kind of something we learned as we went, and as we were playing the game, we were like, okay, these are new, fun, interesting mechanics. So
I think the funniest part was the toy maker one that has like so much text on it that I think you guys spent like 5 minutes just trying to figure out what it did, and then as soon as it came into like actually having a trigger, it instantly sacrificed itself. So like it just
that was my proudest moment. It was being able to guess the number right away. But yeah, it was a lot of build up for like
that just to die. I was like, oh no. Oh man.
Yeah.
So,
but the card that did perform well,
yes.
Do you want to tell us what our MVP card of the game was?
I would. I think it's the Parting of Ways, and double check that's the right one. Yes.
The Parting of the Ways.
The Parting of the Ways. Yeah, it's the saga that Kiro used to just, exile all the value and then time travel, aka remove tons of suspend counters, I believe. So,
but also add suspend counters in certain situations.
Yeah, but it was just like really insane, like the value, because I feel like in that Precon, if you can get to that card and you have like the 10th Doctor out, then that's just kind of like your main win con, and that's pretty much what we saw there. So
it was a complete and utter decimation, but like entertaining. It was fun to watch and experience.
How did you like playing the Boomer Precon?
Listen, there are some cool cards in that deck, but I did not get anything going either game. Spoiler alert. Neither game I was really doing much of anything. I was just there. But it was fun. We were in good company. Again, thank you for everyone who came and joined us and played. Big shout out. All their information will be in the description box, right?
Yeah, that's how technology works. I'm putting that stuff
perfect.
in there.
you're like right down, like add thing. No. But yeah, fantastic people, fantastic Magic players, and it was a joy to get to play with everybody.
Yeah, and we do have a part 1 if you didn't see it, so please go check that out.
Yeah, maybe you'll see me win, even though I kind of spoiled that I didn't. But you never know.
No,
go check it out.
They didn't hear either of those things. But yeah. Hope y'all have a good one. Thanks for hanging out. It means a lot. And fare thee well.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.